Welcome to the Humourology Podcast with me, Paul Barros. This is where we put the fun into business fundamentals. My guest on this edition of the Humourology Podcast is a writer, actor, comic, singer, cabaret artiste and director. Her writing and performances have spanned screens and stages from London to LA. She's a founding member of the fabulous Chickies and an artist in residence for The Braid. When she isn't writing for some of the biggest names in entertainment, such as Stephen Colbert, Steve Martin, Liza Minnelli, Hugh Jackman, Yoko Ono, and even the royal family of Monaco, you can find her on YouTube, where her musical comedy videos garner millions of views. Shelly Goldstein, welcome to the Humourology Podcast.
Thank you, Paul. So happy to be here.
Oh, well, it's lovely to see you here. And I believe you're in London rather than LA at the moment.
Oh, beautiful London. Yes, yes. Well, London is my home, and I'm not terribly far away from you at the moment. We will have to meet face to face for a spot of tea. But I am sorry. I'm an American. I'm one of those horrible people. But I love London. I absolutely love it. I think it's a magical city, and I love having a big chunk of my life here.
Well, that's great because we love having you here, and you bring a touch of glamour to our shores.
Oh, Lord.
Where were you brought up, and what kind of family were you brought up in? And more importantly, was humor valued in your family?
Oh God, yes. I'm a Chicago girl. The second city, Chicago. And my mother was one of the funniest people I've ever known. She had a laugh that just lit up the world, and she was always being silly. She was always being funny, and she was very wise, which is, a lovely combination. And she, and she taught us that, life was too important not to be laughed at. And my dad was just the sweetest man in the world, and he was inadvertently funny. He didn't try to be funny, but he just was, because he was adorable. And he was also a great audience. Although in truth, he would, I started doing theater when I was about 6 years old, and he would, as a great parent does, he would come to all of my shows and he would be supporting me. But in his pocket, he'd have a little radio and an earpiece, and he'd be, listening to probably the Chicago Cubs or whatever sport was at that moment. But then he'd, when I would come on stage, he'd take it out, he'd watch me be there, and then as soon as someone else is okay, what more can a child ask for?
Well, exactly. But I mean, the Jesuits say, "Give me a child of 7." You've just said at 6 you were already on stage. So what the young Shelley was obviously drawn to being theatrical, but was the young Shelley humorous as well?
Yes. Here's the thing. I've always been very tiny, and I have, a round face. I have sort of what I call resting Charlie Brown face. And when I was very, very little, I was round, and my mother would dress me in layers and layers and layers of clothes, because Chicago is very cold. And so coming towards you, I would look like sort of a rugby ball with curly hair. And, and just, I was always making jokes. I was always being silly. I was always finding something to laugh at. And truth be told, without getting too psychological here, my older sister, 7 years older than me, is a brilliant, serious math brain. She spent 30 years being an executive vice president of business affairs at movie studios, and at a time in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, when you didn't see a lot of women doing that. She is not funny. She's brilliant, but she's very serious, And I thought she was perfect. She was beautiful. She was brilliant. She always knew the right answers. Her brain was like a computer. It was just amazing. And I wasn't that. So I always sort of figured, since I didn't like myself that much, if I got you to laugh when I was around, you wouldn't want to kill me. and it was just sort of that simple. And it was something that, everybody does something well. And when you're a child, you sort of figure out what it is you do well. And I could make people laugh. And that was a great gift.
So it was your social glue, essentially, and you realized but then we go back to nature versus nurture, don't we? Your sister has one sort of ability, and you have
Right
another.
brain, left brain. Totally,
Yeah.
there's a Maginot line somewhere in my mother's womb where this is the brilliant side and this is the funny side. And clearly we each set up shop in a different spot.
Was there a need for, let's just call it adulation? I mean, was that always there? And would you call that a show-off gene, if you like?
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it because I really did mean what I said. I think adulation would have been much too much to ask for. I literally was looking for a way not to, it's like if I make fun of myself first, if I'm the person who points out how completely inadequate I am, you won't have to. And the best way for me to do that is to be funny. Because if you do that seriously, God, who would want you around? You'd be so depressing.
Well, I mean, obviously, I've worked in comedy for many years. I know loads of comedians, and I don't think it's something that can just be taught. There has to be an element of like, you realized at a very, very young age, you had this skill set. I mean, can you remember a realization? Was there a moment?
Some of it is instinct. It's just what you feel comfortable doing in the same way that, some children are great at dancing or kicking a ball or, any or languages or something like that. Or my sister with math. I remember as a child going to the grocery store with her and my mother, and she figured out what everything would cost, a week's worth of groceries would cost, including the tax, before the cash register. That was not me. My was, while waiting in line, if it was taking too long, I would keep the people behind us laughing so that they didn't mind having to wait in line after my family.
It really was an inherent thing, because I think most comedians and people do it. We hear different rhythms, don't we? We hear the funny. We hear where it belongs.
And comedy is rhythm, which is why the old joke of the drummer, ba-dum bum,
Yeah.
There is definite rhythm to comedy. Different comics have different rhythms, but there always is. Interestingly enough, because I'm so not athletic, I literally, another, childhood horror is when teams were being picked, they would literally argue over who was stuck with me, sort of thing. But the last time I did a big show in LA, and I was on stage, and there was an awful lot of comedy in this show, in addition to singing and stories and this and that. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was surfing, which is something I would never do. I would never attempt in a million years because, unless it was a death wish, because I would end up, the best thing I could hope for is being eaten by sharks, but with the audience, there is, laughter coming towards you has an energy.
Yeah.
And it's powerful, and it's a drug, and it's mixing with adrenaline, which happens to comedians when they're performing, or actors when they're performing. Just adrenaline sort of keeps you going on stage and lets you forget the world around you. So all that positive energy coming towards you is an amazing, amazing energy. And as I was doing this, I sort of felt, okay, here's the wave, and this is going to be a big wave, and this is going to be a smaller wave. And if I say this like this, the wave's going to go over here, and then I go over here, and then I move it over there. And it was fascinating because I hadn't planned that at all. Then the other part of that is I like to rehearse a show so that when I get on stage, I can forget about it. And if I need to walk away for 20 minutes from something I've planned because I've thought of something, I'll know how to get back and not end up lost in the woods with breadcrumbs trying to find the trail. So comedy really is, I mean, we tend to think that everything we do is very compartmentalized and very different than everything else. But, comedy is a formula, the way speaking is a formula, I'm public speaking, the way doing your job is a formula, the way, Lucy and Vivian with the chocolates on the conveyor belt is a formula. Physical comedy is a different formula than verbal comedy. Slapstick is different than satire.
You write for some of the most famous people in the world, and you have to put words into their mouths. What happens when, because a lot of our audience hate or fear, let's just say, performing, what happens when you get somebody who you think can't deliver the funny? How do you adjust to that?
Well, if I'm writing for someone who can't deliver the funny, odds are they're not wildly famous people. If I'm writing for someone who's wildly famous, and I have had the luck of doing that,
yeah.
Part of the process to do it right, I don't write jokes. I know there are people I know, particularly in Los Angeles, who you could go to them and you could say, okay, it's 2:00. By 2:15, I need 27 jokes about cheese. And they'll have it for you, and they'll be great. But what I do is I'm very good at capturing someone's voice and what their energy is, the way they speak, what their perspective is, how they approach a story, and then you sort of reverse engineer to make what you want them to say work in their voice. You wouldn't write a joke for or a piece of material for Lily Tomlin using Ricky Gervais's voice, because their perspective is so different, their outlook is so different, their life experience is so different. So it's just, again, that's another little thing that I was blessed with. I have a broken foot right now because I can barely walk down the street without causing havoc. But so that anything physical is not my forte. But I was blessed with a gift of I'm very good at capturing someone's voice in words.
Well, that's really interesting, because you sort of implied that anybody who is very famous, like the people you work with, will understand the rhythm and be able to get the laugh if you get their voice right. But do you think, therefore, that everyone can be funny?
Well, let me just say, because there's two answers to that. First of all, you're making it sound like they have to work to make my material right. My job is it's like a pair of shoes. You're not Cinderella's sisters trying to get into the shoes that won't fit. Which of course was an analogy for a vagina, but that's a different conversation.
I think I want to hear that conversation.
My job is to create the right shoe that will fit them. Which is, and just, my job is to hear how they would say something, whether it's about cheese or whether it's about, politics, or whether it's a character in a play. And to it's not them finding the rhythm of the joke, it's me finding their rhythm. That's my job. If I haven't done that, I have failed.
Okay, but then we get to the other part of the question, which is, can everybody be funny, or are there people? Yeah. So we see, I love the attitude, because with my background in psychology, I think they can, but sometimes they need to be told to be more circumspect with what they're trying to do. With there are people who can deliver any gag. Written with Steve Martin, for Steve Martin, anything you can deliver. There are other people who may be head of accounts at a big Fortune 500 company who can't do that. Isn't your job, and my job in a way, to go, here are your parameters of what you can do well. This is what we're going to get you to do.
Well, again, I think, what intimidates people, and we all know that public speaking, whether that's performing or just speaking at a wedding, speaking at an occasion, speaking at a presentation in your office, whatever it might be, the only thing that scares people more than that is death, and it can be intimidating. But when you say, are people funny? Yes, all people are funny. All people are funny. That's why, animals are funny. That's why, a baby panda sneezing will get 50 billion views on YouTube in 5 minutes because it's adorable. But there's different types of funny. There's, again, performers run the gamut of what kind of funny they are. Again, some people are witty, some people are sarcastic, some people are snide, some people are naive, some people are, play dumb, some people are smarter than everybody else and have sort of a razor kind of humor. It's not one thing. And the other side of that is perspective. You don't expect, when you go to the circus, you don't expect the clown to give you a treatise on Aristotle's Poetics and what is funny. You expect him to get hit in the face with a pie and cram into a car with 30 other clowns. So everybody has a funny spot. Sometimes people make a mistake because they try very hard, to be a kind of funny that isn't there, sort of staying in someone else's lane. Which is not to say we all should try things, we all should stretch, we all should reach. But just as I should never play the cello, some people shouldn't attempt certain types of comedy. But that doesn't mean you're not funny. Of course we are. If we can't laugh, we're dead. And I think if you look at the world right now, the biggest danger, without mentioning any names, are the people who are the most dangerous in the world are the ones who you can tell are those few people who have no sense of humor, particularly about themselves.
Well, isn't it
deadly? It's deadly.
It is deadly. And isn't it also that all totalitarian regimes try and put down anybody who is funny, the comedians, the actors, anything, because they're the ones that scare them.
Because the king or the queen has power, or the emperor or whoever, but the court jester is the only person who can speak truth to them.
And we can tell when they haven't got any clothes on, and we're willing to say that.
Exactly. It's always the fool, which is that calling someone a fool is not necessarily a compliment. It's probably an insult. But in the tradition of humanity and roles that people play, being the fool is an important job. It's one I'm real proud of.
Well, it's the Shakespeare quote, isn't it? A fool thinks himself to be wise, but a wise man knows he is a fool.
There's a quote by one of the funniest men who's ever lived, Mel Brooks, and I think this encapsulates a lot of this because, again, it is about perspective. Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you fall into an open manhole and die. And if you think about it, that's kind of how life goes. So it's just, I think if you're talking to someone who's thinking, how can I make my life or my work or my relationships or my business improve through humor? It's by realizing that there are as many types of humor as there are types of snowflakes. And I don't mean that in the political sense, I mean that in the meteorologic sense. It's different. So try different ones on and see which one fits you.
Well, you've spent your life around successful people. What is the special sauce that makes people successful? And obviously it's a Humourology podcast. So is humor important in that mix, or would you say crucial?
Well, first of all, if I could give you an answer right now in 5,000 words or less as to what makes someone a superstar or successful or whatever, don't you think everyone would have done it by now? What makes you fall in love? and what makes you fall in love as opposed to me or as opposed to him or her or them, in the parlance of our times. It's chemistry, it's magic, it's a million, unknown variables that come together that all work right, which is why, again, network studios, radio, record companies for years, whenever those people try a formula and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is going to be big, it might be, it might do okay. But no, it's only when someone comes through who finds a new way of doing something and making it happen, that alchemy results in stardom. I know an awful lot of brilliantly talented people who work really hard and have a lot of perseverance, and who some are at this level of success, 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 and some are at this level of success. It's not a constant.
What we're all striving for is how you get more success within your own realm. What are the elements that the successful have in common? I know what I think. And I think humor is one of those things, the ability to put people at ease and things like that.
Yes, the humor to put people at ease, the humor, the ability to take away a certain amount of intimidation or fear, the ability. I think possibly the best stand-up comic working right now might be American John Mulaney. Mm-hmm. Who is so smart, so brilliant, so funny, at the same time, so self-deprecating while always being the smartest guy in the room. He makes it very clear when he's telling a story that he shows a lot of vulnerability in himself while also showing, a lot of hubris, a lot of pride, a lot of, here are the mistakes I made, I'm going to be honest about it. I think success comes down to so many of those little things we learn about in kindergarten that we forget about. Don't take yourself too seriously. That doesn't mean don't take what you do seriously. It means don't be pompous and filled with hot air. Work really hard. Don't expect that you're going to be able to cut corners because you're, threatening someone or bribing someone, or you're able to work. People who work scams work harder than people who actually work. And whereas we love stories of scammers, it usually doesn't work. It might work, one in a certain amount of times. But if you know what you want to do, if you figure out how you're best to accomplish what you want to do, if you really put in the work, put in the responsibility, don't be afraid to laugh at yourself, and don't be afraid to make someone else laugh, not because you're making fun of them, but because you're making things a little easier for them. When you're in a tough situation with somebody, no matter how difficult it is, if you can laugh together, you'll solve whatever the problem is. If you're just sort of, okay, we got to make this work, you're going to be so tight that nothing's going to happen.
It's also about creativity, isn't it? When we're relaxed, we can be more creative. And so, they're trying to everybody work harder and get more serious about it is going to strangle any kind of creativity. I think one of the things that I've always found is that anybody who can laugh at themselves, you're already more sympathetic, in sympathy with their whole thing, because it takes away the pomposity at that point, doesn't it?
Exactly right. Yes.
You touched on it gets you over things. Do you think that humor is important in dealing with traumatic situations as well?
Both of my parents' funerals, the religious person in attendance got their names wrong. My sister, my mother, and I our hearts were shattered and broken on the floor when my father died, and this man who'd never met him gave sort of textbook number 3 obituary And not only did he get his name wrong, but my father had almost drowned when he was a child, and he had a terror of water. And this person started going, his life was like a great ship. He was on an ocean and he was swimming through. And we just started to laugh. And we were laughing and laughing and laughing. And it's a good thing that we were in the front, because people behind us thought we were, and in our hearts we were. But it was so funny. And if he had been there, he would have seen how funny it was. And the same thing when my mother passed, I sent a notice to the newspaper, and they spelled her name wrong. And I just thought, well, maybe this is good. Maybe this means this person died, but not, not my mother, whose name is spelled like this. Maybe she's still here. So, when you see something like that, you can be furious and you can call up the newspaper and you can, because there were newspapers then, and threaten to kill someone and all that. And your feelings are justified, but it's not going to change the fact that there it is in the paper being delivered to millions of people on that day, and now on the internet forever. Or you can laugh at it and point out what happened. And that releases some of your own anguish. And when you've done that, when you try any way you can to release the things that hold you back, which are usually fear, stress, anxiety, expectation that you're not up to what you're doing. If you can undo any of those buttons, you're going to fly a lot more easily. And humor is a great, great, great tool for that.
I love the whole thing of attitude and perspective, really. And isn't what all humor is about is getting perspective and then getting the right attitude to it? You had a choice. You could go, I could get furious about this at one of the worst times in our lives. Somebody has made this mistake. Or you can do something that is going to make you feel better in the long run, which is to laugh at a situation. We are all ridiculous, I think, is where we should come in and start. And the fact that we're here is pure chance. And the idea that we're going to take it so seriously is an anathema, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because here's the thing. Life is going to lob cannonballs at your head every single day. You will be walking down the street and a bucket of feces will fall on your head. You have to expect that. So once you sort of make your peace with that, humor can, one, help you deal with that situation, and two, humor might help you be a little more adept at dodging those situations. So it's a win-win in that regard.
Why do you think we are so drawn to people who can make us laugh? What's the compulsion? Is it just a release? Is it sort of that we get more perspective? We like being around that attitude.
Laughter feels really good. Again, if you get really, I'm not a chemist or a biologist, but if you sort of break down what laughter does inside of you, and I mean real laughter, not sort of, or pretend laughter, or, oh God, I have to laugh at that because it's my boss telling the joke, but real laughter from your gut.
Yeah.
Will do the same thing physiologically to your body as, yes, an orgasm. The other side of that is going for a laugh just as going for an orgasm. You have to understand that most of the time you will fail, but the journey and the attempt will be worth it. The most memorable ones are the ones where you fail, and everybody fails in life. So again, it's failure can stop everything for something, but I'm never doing that again. I'm never doing that again. I failed. I'm not going to try anymore. Or, okay, I screwed that one up. How do we go back in there?
Hands up.
Enough about my sex life, yes.
Exactly. No, but I mean, is there anything better, including in everybody's sex life, and when it goes wrong, what are you going to do? You're going to put your head in your hands. You go, oh, this never happens to me. It's the worst thing. I'm so sorry. Or you're going to both laugh at it. And that will make it easier the next time. I mean, by the way, it's the biggest stress buster there is. I
Oh,
mean, because
absolutely.
obviously laughter lowers cortisol levels, reduces the stress.
Good for your heart, good for, your innards, you know.
Well, yeah, it releases endorphins. It's a natural feel-good chemicals, for the body.
Kids, TikTok, it's a drug. Laughter is a drug.
Well,
These
absolutely. You
days
were
it's
saying earlier on about, you suddenly realized that you were surfing and you could get people to do anything. I mean, that to me is the greatest feeling in the world. And I'm very fortunate to speak at conferences and obviously coming from the old Comedy Store days. I know, but the actual thing where you go, I can make this whole room laugh together. That's really powerful stuff. And that's that shared laughter strengthens social bonds, and it increases your sense of belonging and community at that point, doesn't it?
yes. I also think right now, there's something about the world right now where we are being set up in everything, big, small, tiny, massive, to always be angry at each other, to always be pissed off, to see each other as the enemy. There's an awful lot of hatred that's blooming very happily right now. I think that it's actually an act of subversion in a wonderful way to just, pop that balloon with some laughter, with humor, when you laugh with somebody, you're going to find a shared something with them that will let you build on a relationship as opposed to, I hate you and I want nothing to do with you and I have to kill you. And we're doing a little too much of that, and I think we can all see how the world is just blossoming accordingly. So I think we have to move in another direction. And some people will say, well, that just means we need peace and love and hugging. And well, start with laughing at somebody. And I don't mean at somebody, I mean with somebody.
With somebody. Well, that's interesting because there is, it's a very fine line, isn't it? But I was thinking while you were talking, does the truth go down easier with a joke attached? I.e., can we get to the core of the problem? And if we'll laugh together, we realize we've all got this problem. Will it bring us back to, will the joke essentially be able to tell the truth easier?
You just made me think of a very, 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 very old joke, which, maybe this isn't the best way, but it's, the sergeant calls all his men to attention and addresses them and says, all right, men, glad you're here. Everyone with a living mother, step forward. Not so fast, Macintosh. So, maybe that's not the best way to get but he tried.
Well, no, yeah. It's funny. I remember that joke, and it's the longer version of it's a classic gag. There's an
Yeah.
example of it being funny because the person didn't know how to do it. So, is humor a superpower at that point, whereby when it's done really well, it can actually. Now, I just did an interview earlier on for a big TV channel over here, and they were trying to sort of go the two main contenders, I kept on going back to what we want to see, and what the Humourology podcast is about is that it's not just about being funny, it's about humanizing, it's about humanity, it's about humility. And humor is a bigger thing than that. And so when I say is humor a superpower, it's really, is it that ability to have fun with it?
I think you're very much onto something, and I think it is. That's not to say, here I am to save the day, but it's so needed right now. It is a power that is so needed right now, and I think it's very, very beneficial. And I love the fact that you go into places where humor is not even considered, as a positive or a negative. It's like, this is an office, it's not relevant. Well, but it is.
Yeah.
but it is. And I love that you make that clear to people. I used to work teaching years and years and years ago. We would do improv games for, executives and business people and very, very serious, sort of Monty Python three-piece suit kinds of men and the occasional lady. And it was like teaching them a new language, which is fine. You just have to understand that here's how you speak this language, and you don't start a child by giving them Shakespeare, because that's going to be a bit too much for them to comprehend. But children understand, peekaboo, and they'll laugh at that. So there's ways. I'm not saying infantilize people who aren't in comedy. I'm just saying find ways to show them how humor, one, is already in their daily lives, and to embrace it and not to be afraid of it.
Do you think people are scared of it? Do you think actually, I mean, in as we described it, the modern world, people are now more scared because humor has to take a dangerous line sometimes. And I'm presuming, as somebody who in humor, you've had to step across the line occasionally without knowing it in order to find where the line is.
Well, again, my feelings about that are there's an old, I'll come back to this, but there's an old argument that there should never be any violence in movies, because violence in movies is going to become violence in the world. Well, are you talking about violence in a splatter kill movie, or are you talking about The Godfather or Goodfellas? It's used in a different way. So it's the same thing with crossing a line. Like anything else, if you're going to walk on a tightrope, you have to know what you're doing, or you're going to fall to your death. So someone like, George Carlin, the great George Carlin, Richard Pryor, the first of them all, Lenny Bruce, certain people today, it is very important to skillfully know how to cross the line. There are other people who say, oh, I'm being persecuted because I'm crossing the line, when in reality, all they're doing is just punching down at someone who doesn't have any power. The other thing about that is people out of power are funnier than people in power. It comes back to that, the fool versus the royalty, or the president or the emperor or whatever. When a lot of comics get their jokes by making fun of people who they perceive as weaker than they are, that's just kind of crass. It's like the difference between a wonderful, well-crafted, humorous film and a whoopee cushion. Do you want to laugh, or do you just want to fart? But even, but that's not to say that there aren't people who do great physical, and silly comedy. But the only comedy I don't like is the stuff that's cruel and that punches down, that belittles people, works to dehumanize people. The only reason I bring that up is because a lot of people who are bad comics or who are cruel comics say, oh, well, I'm just crossing a line of what's appropriate. No, you're just kind of being an a-hole, and you don't have to do that.
You can say asshole on the Humourology.
I know, but I'm such a nice girl, and I said,
I realize that. It's really interesting that the fact that, the lines that we draw are very personal. But what you were talking about, I thought, was just pure the difference between laughing with permission and bullying.
Exactly. Perfectly said.
Nobody likes a bully, and bullies only pick on people they perceive to be weaker than them.
Perfectly said.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to use humor in their speeches?
For me, I think the simplest thing to do is find your own voice. Once you know what you are comfortable with, what, then you can work on adjusting it ever so slightly to make it a little more humorous.
Me with my psychological head on, I'm going, somebody who's listening to this, going, that's all very well for you to say, find your own voice. In practical terms, how does somebody actually find their own voice? What's key to finding that?
Well, think about some of the questions you asked me and ask them yourself. When was the last time you really laughed? What happened? Who were you with? Where were you? What was the circumstance? Was it because you were watching something that amused you, or were your pants on fire? What happened, and think about how you would tell that story to someone, to try to recreate the good feeling that you had. And again, the simplest thing for anyone doing any kind of public speaking anywhere, whether it's to your teacher or at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, be yourself. Have it come from a place of reality within you and your heart and your soul. If you try to be something you're not, people read that. People will read that and they won't be, they won't connect with you in the way you want them to. That when you're talking to someone, and again, someone can be one person, maybe you're going to propose to someone, or it can be 1,000 people in a conference. Whoever it is you're talking to, they're a character in what you're doing. So you have to be able to read them. And that's sort of something that we do every day, when you're on the tube, when you're at lunch, when you're, standing in line at a film, we know just, there's certain ways you act around people. And if you do this, it'll get a better reaction than if you walk up to someone and punch them in the face. That might not go well. So we're taking all of this, but we're turning it into words instead of action.
So is there an element of, it's authenticity, isn't it? Don't try and be what you are not. Which, by the way, sometimes, having worked in comedy for many years, I saw a lot of comedians try and find their voice. There used to be the guy who used to run the Comedy Store, Kim Kinney, who's unfortunately no longer with us. And the amount of times I saw him go up to comedians who are now world superstars and just say one simple thing. He goes, I don't know who you are.
That was good advice to them, but that's a lot of what the first years of someone doing stand-up or someone trying to write comedy does. It's not, you're not sprung fully formed from the head of Zeus. You have to figure out who you are, what your voice is. But all the best comics in the history of comedy, you knew what you were going to get with them. You know what their perspective is. And they, it took a long time to sort of make it work. But when it does, and you've got that, then it becomes a little bit easier because that, the way you're looking to something makes sense to you and how you see things and how you do things. I'm trying to think of in a business capacity, particularly now that so many people are still working in different ways than we did before COVID. Just as you and I are on Zoom, there are still people doing things on Zoom. It's very, very hard to to sort of feel like you're really with somebody when you're on a camera, And I did shows during COVID. I once did a show for I was in Los Angeles, and through Zoom I was performing for 1,000 people in North Carolina, and I'm doing comedy and their mics are off. I don't know if they're laughing. It was terrifying, but you just had to, either if I'm like, are they going to laugh? They're not going to laugh. But if I just dive in, I had, they hired me again and they said they liked me. So I guess it kind of worked. But that's another thing. Like once you know who you are, don't be afraid to bring that person into the world. if you need to talk to someone at, your boss or your employee, don't write a speech. The worst thing anyone can ever do is say that I'm a speech writer, because I write a lot of events like award shows and things like that. And it's like, no, speeches are boring. I don't write speeches. I write for people to talk, you know. So that's really it. And like everything else, whether it's your relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's an employee-employer situation, the more genuine you are, the farther you're going to go.
I love that fact of being genuine. You mentioned business, so I wanted to take it back to, if I asked you to write a business case for humor, i.e., why should it be more used in the business world, what would you include in the business case?
I think some of what we said before, that humor allows you to break down the things that hold you back. And you're not going to be able to make a sale, or you're not going to be able to convince an employee that this is, that this is the way we should do things, if you're so certain that I'm really, really serious about this and it's got to go like this, because something's going to happen that you don't expect. And you have to kind of be on the fly with that. And so it's just, again, it's bringing, we tend to think that we lose our humanity while we're working, that, whether it's 9 to 5 or whatever, nobody works 9 to 5 anymore. We're all working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But we tend to think that, when we go into an office, or when we go on a Zoom, or when we're at a meeting or an interview or something like that, this is hard. This is serious. This is really, really, got to be done by the numbers. There's no coloring outside of the lines and all that sort of thing. And to an extent, of course, that's true. But if it's 100% the way that you and your employees and your coworkers and your teachers or your students act, then you're not going to hear each other. You're going to be so trapped in the walls you've put around yourself so that you're getting the job done. You're not going to get it done. If the more you humanize, the better things will go. And the more you humanize, the more humor will come into it naturally without looking for it, because life does that.
And what's the return on investment for, if we were persuading the FTSE 500 people, what's the return on investment of having more humor in the workplace?
Maybe people won't want to get the hell out of the office so fast.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're actually in a situation where people aren't scared, people aren't intimidated, people aren't being bullied, people aren't being felt that they're not valued, but people think that, I like this person. Maybe we don't always agree, because that's, again, it's not Disneyland and everybody's, dancing through the tulips every day. But if there's a sense that I can be myself, I don't have to pretend to be Paul, the worker, or Shelly, the worker, but I can just be, Paul or Shelly. We're going to do better for them, and they're going to do better for us. And people were going to want to be around you more, and you're going to be around them more.
I think that's right. And I always say to people, really, you are trying to anchor people into being around you, because we're all in sales on some level. By the way, when people are thinking, who am I going to get in to write the speech for me for the Oscars? Part of the deal will be, do I like Shelley's work? But the other
I've never written the Oscars.
Yet. This is
Hello.
This is the springboard.
I've written many, many, many award shows, but never the Oscars.
Well, not yet, but it'll come. But what I mean is that yes, this is going to, people are going to say, can they do the job? But the really important thing is, do I like having them around?
Yeah.
It's life.
And that's a lot of it with me. I'm a relatively easygoing person to work with. I
think I'll decide that, Shelley.
Exactly. Oh, I failed. Oh no. Oh no. But no, I mean, I'm going to say the word. I try not to be an asshole. You know, we all have a little bit of it in us. Some people have a lot of it in us. But I like working. I like working with people that I like working with. There's no guarantee that's going to happen. But you make the best of what you are. I like everything in life right now except my hair. I all day I know I'm going to be on camera, and I look like something died on my head. This is not a good thing.
No, it's not. Well, but by the way, there's two things that people really care about in their business life. We've talked about that at length, and their relationships, or people who want relationships. I know your husband, Brendan, who is a very funny man. Is laughter the lifeblood of any relationship? And
Oh
how would
God,
you use
yes.
it?
Oh God, yes. And I am so lucky. I am so lucky. We laugh every day, and lately, I'm not going to bore you with specifics. We've had lots and lots and lots of reasons to cry, and you roll up your sleeves and you face that kind of stuff and you deal with it. But we find a lot of laughter, and when I am feeling my worst, again, his comedy persona is not like mine. He sometimes says that thinks he's married to Fozzie the bear. He said, he wakes up every morning and I come into the room on a tricycle with a klaxon horn. And that poor man puts up with me being that person, whereas he is much drier, wittier. I'll do sort of na 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 na, and he'll just say one word and it'll be hilarious, and it's great.
My favorite joke, one of my favorite jokes is a Fozzie the Bear joke. Come in and I go, the comedian's a bear. And I go, no, he's wearing a necktie.
Just bringing up the Muppets for a minute, one thing that someone once called me and they said, I am so insulted. I said, well, I have written some of the best television in history, and I got a call today, and they want me to write for puppets. He said, isn't that just an insult? And it was, I mean, I said, well, are you going to write for them like, sock puppets, or are you going to write for them like the Muppets? He said, yeah, because I mean, Jim Henson, Frank Oz, those people, those writers, those puppeteers, that's some of the most wonderful comedy of the past 6 decades. So that's another thing. It's I always say it's not that you're writing for puppets, it's how you're writing for puppets. It's not that you're working for X sort of person, it's how you're doing it.
Absolutely. And by the way, it's genius. It's absolutely genius.
Oh God, yes.
I was lucky enough to work with the great Robin Williams a couple of times, and he did the Muppets. And
Yes.
the outtakes of him with the Muppets are hilarious. And because he is doing it with humanity and bringing his real self to it. He's not sort of like, oh, I'm demeaning myself to do this. He's throwing himself into that, and he's living every moment.
And he understood, sometimes people say, oh, I'm being childlike. No, you're just being stupid. But he understood the childish, the child's impulse, not childish. I never met him. I wish I had. I think the closest I've ever come to working with a comic who had that similar type of energy is I once was lucky enough to write a TV episode starring Billy Connolly.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, so brilliant, so smart, so funny, so human, such a regular guy, but always 10 steps ahead of everybody. Another person in a quieter way like that, which again, something I'll cherish for the rest of my life, is Steve Martin, who can work that way at the same time on both physical comedy level and a intellectual comedy level, and is just, it's like playing 12-dimensional chess. It's fascinating.
Absolute genius.
Fascinating.
Absolute genius. Well, Shelley, the time has flown and we still haven't got down to our favorite bit of the show, which is
Uh-oh.
quick fire questions.
Here we go. All right.
Quick fire questions.
Who is the funniest business person that you've met?
Well, again, I would have to say, you know, someone in the business of comedy. I was discovered at university by the great legendary Gary Marshall,
Oh,
who
my word.
television wise created Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, discovered Robin Williams, made Robin Williams a star on Mork and Mindy. His films include, Pretty Woman, The Princess Diaries, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Flag Day, Valentine's Day. Brilliant, 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 brilliant man. And he had a magnificent ability to always be funny, to always find the humor in every situation. But he also knew, like on a television show, he knew every single person on the set. He knew what they did. He knew what they were capable of doing. He knew what you needed to do to encourage them to go farther. He knew how to make something funnier. He knew when you needed a moment that needed to be serious. He knew that everybody had to be paid. He always used to say life is more important than show business, even though you were going to be working 14 hours a day for him. I think he was a brilliant, brilliant man. And
Yeah.
also damn funny. Damn funny.
Well, you see, not just damn funny, but there we go to the whole humorology ethos of like humility, humanity, and humor at the same time.
Such a kind man. So beloved. So beloved. And, someone that one of the very few people in the world that no one in his entire life and career had a bad syllable to say about him.
I think, you see, I love to hear the word kind, but I don't think it's used enough. I think kind and thoughtful are wonderful things. If you're going to have a gravestone, I kind of would hope that the word kind was on there. And if anybody thinking about what they want on their gravestone, why don't you live your life with the thought that I would like that to be on my gravestone?
I want mine to say, wait, isn't that her over there? Yeah. But
Well, the Spike Milligan line, of course. I told you I was ill.
Yes. Again, you mentioned I'm that's so exciting that you got to work with Robin. Robin Williams took no prisoners in his comedy. There was nothing weak about his comedy. There was nothing meek about his comedy, but there was never anything mean about his comedy. Never. Yeah. And that's what a master does.
Yeah. And he can also be childlike, which I think I really resonated with me because, by the way, why should we lose that element? That's a beautiful element to be childlike. There is a difference, childlike and versus childish. I get it, but childlike is beautiful. I love that.
And again, I enjoy irony. I enjoy people who, have attitude in their comedy. But again, it's another thing. George Carlin ripped through the hypocrisy of politics, of religion, of anything that mattered in the world. Never mean, but his humor was an AK-47. It was so powerful, but never had to be mean. So it's just mean is the easiest way to get a laugh that nobody will ever remember.
Yeah, I completely agree. What book makes you laugh, Shelley?
A book that says how to fix a car, because I'll never be able to do that. I was thinking about this, and there are certain authors whose work I love to read. I love to read George S. Kaufman, again, Mel, Carl Reiner, Neil Simon, Woody, you know, people like, someone like Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele, wise, funny people. It's not like there is a title, because again, humor in prose is very different than humor in performance. So I just like a book that's going to take me on a great, vacation with someone who's funny.
Well, funny enough, one of my favorite books, and it's not necessarily funny, but it's just because it's brilliantly revealing, was Born Standing Up
Oh
by
yeah,
Steve Martin, which I'm
yes.
sure you've read.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, bios of all those people are very, very interesting. I can never get enough of Steve. I can never get enough of Lily Tomlin or Stephen Colbert or John
yeah.
Oliver. Another person, John Oliver is probably the greatest political comic in on certainly on American television right now. And he rips people to shreds, but is never mean,
Mm.
because he's punching up. He's punching at those who hurt others. So yeah, and anything those guys come up with, I'll spend some time with.
Okay, what film makes you laugh?
Oh boy. Well, probably the funniest movie I've ever seen would be the original Producers, 1968, with Nathan Lane.
Zero Must. Oh no, the original one.
I'm sorry. Yes, with Zero
Right?
Mostel and Gene Wilder.
Yeah, I
Um,
was going to say zero.
Blazing
No.
Saddles with Gene Wilder and Cleavon Little. Uh, um, the Mel Brooks trifecta, the Producers, Blazing Saddles, and Young Frankenstein. There's a very silly movie called Start the Revolution Without Me that starred Donald Sutherland and Gene Wilder. That's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. The original In-Laws movie with Alan Alda and not Alan Alda. I'm sorry, my brain is going today. I didn't sleep well last night. Alan Arkin and Peter Falk. One of the funniest things ever produced.
Well, our
Uh,
audience are going to have I mean, I ask you for one recommendation, you give me 23. That's wonderful. And people are going to be desperately going, I
anything
haven't seen that.
anything with Madeline Kahn in it. Madeline
Oh,
Kahn
wow.
in Blazing
Yeah.
Saddles, probably the most beautiful, brilliant, perfect, funny woman ever captured on film.
Okay.
So
I
I
will
love
look
I
up
love
more
funny
Madeline
women.
Kahn.
I'm talking about lots of men today, but I love funny women. You
Yeah.
know,
Okay. What word makes you laugh?
government.
Because it's so ridiculous,
Because if I
or
don't laugh, I will weep.
nice, nice. Okay. Well, I'm going to talking about taking you to the other side, which you've led us to, is
Okay.
what's not funny.
We've said it many, many, many times in this conversation. Cruelty.
Yeah.
Cruelty isn't funny. You know, that doesn't mean that something, lots of early comedy has people being, hit in the face with a 2x4, or as Mel Brooks said, falling into an open manhole and dying is hilarious. But it's, again, it's the attitude, you know. I recently saw a beautiful, fully remade print of the movie Singing in the Rain, and Donald O'Connor's "Make 'Em Laugh"
I can laugh. Yeah.
is some of the greatest slapstick I've ever seen in my life. But it's not cruel because it's not really hurting him.
Hmm.
Humor that's designed, and there's a lot of that in reality television. Let's let's see how miserable we can make people and laugh at them.
No, I completely agree. What sound makes you laugh?
If I was going to get sentimental, I would say, hearing my husband, because it certainly makes me smile and often makes me laugh. Um, I'm not trying to shy away from the answer, but again, going back to something I said at the beginning of this talk, laughter is like love. And you can't really say, it's like I know it when I see it, I know it when I'll hear it. You know, when you meet that person who you're going to love and hopefully is going to love you, something happens and there's this sparkle, this little thing that happens that didn't happen before. And same thing with laugh. You know, you go to a show and unless you're like this, you know, if you know it's a comedy, you're sort of opening yourself up to it. But you don't know when the moment's going to be. You don't know what's going to bring it about. It's not like, you know, good evening. You know, somebody's going to do something or say something or make a remark or point something out that is going to hit you in a way where the only response to it is laughter, is that little piece of your soul saying, yeah, right. You know, so, you know, I don't, again, if we knew the magic formula, you and I would be sitting on a, you know, trunk of gold. But I
We're
just
not doing too bad.
I just know that I have to keep myself open to finding it because I need the laughter.
Don't we all? Penultimate question, Shelley. Would you rather be considered clever or funny?
Ooh. Well, clever's a subset of funny. You know, funny is, I mean, because there's so much different types of funny. I like, you know, that my funny tends not to be stupid, you know. On a good day, I'm clever. But I think, you know, clever's a $10 word and funny's just there for everybody. So I think funny.
Beautiful. And finally, Shelley, desert island gags. If you can only take one joke with you to a desert island, what would it be?
It's funny. I've been thinking about some of my favorite jokes, and there's a few that maybe in the next conversation, but not in this one. But I will tell you a joke that I love. It's a silly joke, but I just think it's perfectly constructed. Okay. This guy, because it's never a man or a person, it's just this guy. This guy's got 100 penguins, and he's got to take them to the zoo. So he's taking the truck to the zoo. He's on the freeway, and the truck breaks down. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I got to get these penguins to the zoo by 2:00. And pulls the truck over, and nobody's coming. Finally, another car comes that is big enough to take care of the penguins. He waves the guy down. He goes, listen, buddy, I got these 100 penguins. I got to get them to the zoo by 2:00. I'm going to give you $100 if you'll just get them to the zoo by 2:00. He goes, okay. So they pack the penguins into the other car. The guy shoots off towards the zoo. First guy's dealing with his car. He fixes it. Didn't take him quite as long as he thought. And he looks, it's 1:30. I think I can get to the zoo and see what happens. So he's driving towards the zoo. All of a sudden, he looks down the freeway and he sees the guy that he gave the money to walking down the shoulder of the road. And he's followed by a line of 100 penguins. He screeches on the brakes, jumps out of the car, goes over to the guy and he goes, what the hell are you doing? I gave you $100 to get these penguins to the zoo. And he goes, I took them to the zoo. We had money left over. So now we're going to go to the ball game.
Oh, a beautiful gag. Yeah. Oh, that's a fantastic gag, and it will go with you to a desert island.
It's dumb, and I like it.
Oh, well, we love you. Are not dumb, and we love you, and your attitude has absolutely made the Humourology altitude go through the skies. So, Shelly Goldstein, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on the Humourology podcast.
Thank you, my friend Paul.
The Humourology podcast was hosted by Paul Barros, produced by David Rose, music by Steve Hayworth, creative direction by Les Hughes, and additional research by Helen Sykes. Please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This has been a Big Sky production.